You have seen it before. The hardest worker in the room gets passed over. Again, the person who actually knows the most sits quietly in the corner, while someone louder, flashier, and half as qualified stands at the front collecting all the applause. You watch it happen in offices, in governments, in your own friend group, and every single time you ask yourself the same question. Why? Why does the most capable person keep losing to the most confident one? Why does real intelligence go unrecognized while performance gets rewarded? Why do the people who shout the loudest end up with the most power, even when they clearly do not deserve it? For most of your life, you were told a story, a comforting one. Work hard, get smart, rise to the top. The world rewards merit. The best people win. Those in charge got there because they earned it. It is a beautiful idea. It is also mostly false. And the man who figured this out did not live in a modern boardroom or a political campaign. He lived 2,400 years ago in Athens, Greece. His name was Aristotle. And what he discovered about power, people, and how societies actually work still explains almost everything you see around you today. Once you understand what he saw, you will never look at leadership the same way again. Let us start with something honest. Most of us want to believe the people in charge know what they are doing. Think about why. If the leaders at the top are competent, then the world has order. Someone capable is steering things. Decisions are being made by people qualified to make them. That belief is soothing. It makes the uncertainty of life feel a little more manageable. But look around you honestly for just one moment. Look at the politicians making decisions that affect millions of lives. How many of them could explain, in clear, simple terms, the actual consequences of their own policies? How many have read the reports, understood the data, spent real time thinking about what happens 5 years from now? Look at the CEOs leading major companies. How many of them built something from nothing versus simply navigating the right relationships at the right time? Look at the managers above you, the leaders in your community, the influencers shaping culture online. If you are truly honest, the picture becomes uncomfortable fast. Because what you see, over and over again, in every field, in every country, in every era of human history, is not a system that puts excellence at the top. What you see is a system that puts familiarity at the top. And Aristotle was the first person to explain why, and why this is not a bug in the design of society. It is the entire point. Aristotle did not theorize from a quiet room. He watched. He walked through the agora, the open public square at the heart of Athens, where citizens gathered to debate, argue, vote, and decide the future of their city. He stood among crowds. He listened to speeches. He observed which men were chosen to lead and which men were passed over completely. Athens was doing something radical for its time. Ordinary people had a real voice. They could vote, they could speak, they could choose who led them. It was the first real experiment in democracy, and the world was watching. But Aristotle watched more carefully than most, and what he noticed disturbed him. The men chosen to lead were almost never the sharpest, almost never the most visionary, almost never the most deeply knowledgeable about the actual problems Athens faced. Many of them were mediocre at best, yet the crowd kept choosing them, enthusiastically, sometimes passionately. So Aristotle started asking the question no one else was asking. Not, who should lead, but why do people choose the leaders they actually choose? And the answer he found was this: people do not choose leaders to move forward. They choose leaders to feel safe. That one insight changes everything. Because once you understand that safety, not progress, not merit, not excellence, is the real engine behind how leaders get chosen, the entire confusing pattern of the world starts making sense. To explain how societies work, Aristotle used a metaphor that still holds up perfectly today. He said, think of society as a living body. A body has many parts. The brain thinks and plans, the hands act and build, the lungs breathe, the legs move. Each part has a job, and the body only works when all of them do theirs. But there is one organ whose job is not to think or to act or to build: the heart. The heart does not make decisions. It does not create strategy. It does not come up with new ideas. The heart does one thing. It keeps the rhythm going, beat after beat after beat. It keeps the blood moving. It keeps everything else alive. Aristotle said leaders are meant to be the heart, not the brain. Their job is not to be the most intelligent person in the room. Their job is to keep the room together, to maintain the rhythm, to make sure the whole organism does not fall apart. And when you look at leadership through that lens, suddenly the choices society keeps making start to seem less irrational. A brain that thinks too fast, too differently, too far outside the known is dangerous to the body. It can send the whole organism lurching in a direction no one else is ready for. It can break the rhythm that keeps everything alive. So what does the body do? It protects itself. It pushes back. It slows the brain down. It chooses instead someone who keeps the beat steady, someone whose ideas do not move faster than the body can follow, someone who makes the collective feel that things are going to be okay, even when they are not. This is why societies across all of history have consistently chosen leaders who reflect the crowd rather than challenge it, who echo values back rather than question them, who perform stability even when they have no idea how to actually create it. This is the heart function of leadership, and it explains almost everything. So if society does not reward brilliance, where do the brilliant people go? Aristotle had a clear answer for this. In his writing on ethics, he described what he believed was the highest goal a human being could pursue. He called it eudaimonia. It is usually translated as happiness, but that is too simple. What Aristotle really meant was human flourishing, the full development of your potential. Living in a way that makes you genuinely, deeply excellent at being human. And here is the crucial thing he noticed. The people who truly pursue eudaimonia rarely pursue power. Think about the most genuinely capable people you have ever encountered. The ones who read constantly. The ones who solve problems that make your head hurt just thinking about them. The ones who create things that did not exist before they imagined them. What drives those people? Not control over others, not titles, not platforms, not applause. What drives them is the work itself, the discovery, the craft, the deep satisfaction of doing something exceptionally well. Aristotle understood this, and he noticed something important about them. They do not play the games required to gain power. They do not spend their days building alliances, flattering the right people, managing how they appear, or performing a confidence they do not feel. They are focused on the substance of what they do, not on how it looks to everyone else. And in a world where power is won through performance, not through substance, this puts them at a permanent disadvantage. They refuse to play the game, so the game leaves them behind. But here is something even deeper. It is not just that brilliant people choose to step away from the competition for power. It is that even when they try, the system actively filters them out. Here is why. The smartest people see things others cannot see yet. They think in ways that feel foreign to the majority. They propose solutions that seem strange, risky, or too complicated. When a visionary stands in front of a crowd and honestly explains what they see, the real complexity of the problem, the real difficulty of the solution, the real trade-offs involved, the crowd does not feel inspired. The crowd feels uncomfortable, because discomfort is not what people want from a leader. People want to feel that someone understands them, that someone is like them, that someone sees the world the way they see it. The visionary, by definition, sees things differently from the crowd, and the more clearly and honestly they express that, the more alienated the crowd becomes. He doesn't understand us. She seems out of touch. I'm not sure I trust that one. And just like that, the system filters them out, not through any conspiracy, not through any deliberate plot, just through the natural mechanics of how groups of people choose who to follow. You see this pattern everywhere. In the corporate world, the engineer who is deeply and technically brilliant rarely becomes the CEO. Not because the company does not benefit from her thinking, it absolutely does, but because the CEO role requires a completely different set of skills. It requires making everyone feel confident, handling the politics of the boardroom, projecting certainty even when the data is unclear. Those are performance skills, not technical ones. So the brilliant engineer stays in her lane, and a more politically skilled but far less technically deep person takes the corner office. In elections, the candidate who gives honest, nuanced answers to difficult problems almost always loses to the one who gives simple, emotionally satisfying answers, even when those answers are shallow. Voters do not reward complexity. They reward the feeling of being understood. Aristotle would say none of this is strange, none of this is surprising. It is the body protecting itself, rejecting what does not fit, elevating what feels familiar and safe. The organism survives. Excellence waits in the shadows. Here is where Aristotle's thinking gets truly remarkable, because he understood the science of persuasion in a way that modern psychology has only recently caught up to. In a work called The Rhetoric, he broke down how one person actually moves another person. How do you get someone to listen, to follow, to trust? He said there are three forces at work. The first is logos, logic, facts, evidence, the world of data and clear thinking. The second is pathos, emotion, feelings, fears, hopes, and desires. The third is ethos, character and credibility, the sense of this person is trustworthy, this person is one of us. Now here's what Aristotle discovered, and what research keeps confirming 2,400 years later. People believe they are making decisions based on logos. They are almost always being moved by pathos and ethos. Logos matters at the edges. It helps you justify a decision you have already made emotionally. But it is almost never what drives the original choice. You feel something first. Then you find reasons to support what you already feel. This is why the candidate with the better policy platform so often loses to the one who simply makes people feel more seen. It is not stupidity on the part of voters. It is biology. Human beings are social animals who evolved in small tribes where belonging meant survival. Your brain is wired at a very deep level to prioritize social connection and emotional safety over abstract correctness. So when a leader stands up and says, "I am one of you. I understand your pain. I see what you see and I feel what you feel," something in the brain relaxes. A sense of safety activates. Trust forms. And when a different leader stands up and says, "Actually, the situation is more complicated than that, and here are the 17 factors we need to consider," something in the brain tightens. Uncertainty activates. Distance forms. The first leader wins, not because they are more capable, but because they are more emotionally compatible with what the crowd needs to feel. This is the secret machinery underneath politics, business, and almost every form of social power you will ever encounter. And the people who rise to the top are not always the ones who understand the world most clearly. They are the ones who understand the crowd's emotions most precisely. But wait, if this is how the system works, how do any intelligent people end up in power at all? Because some do. History is not completely empty of leaders with genuine depth and capability. So what makes them different from the brilliant people who get filtered out? Aristotle hinted at this, and it is one of the most psychologically interesting parts of his thinking. The intelligent leaders who actually succeed are the ones who learn to do something very specific. They learn to hide the threatening parts of their intelligence. They translate complexity into simplicity without losing the truth underneath. They know when to show their full thinking and when to keep it quiet. They speak in the emotional language the crowd understands, even while thinking in a far more sophisticated register privately. They make people feel safe, and then from within that trust, they occasionally move things forward. In other words, they perform a kind of strategic self-limitation. They choose to appear as less than they are, at least publicly, because they understand that being fully and visibly themselves would cost them the room. Think about the leaders throughout history who managed to be both genuinely intelligent and genuinely powerful. Almost without exception, they were also masters of simplicity in their public communication. They knew how to take a complicated idea and make it feel obvious. They knew how to make even a radical new direction feel like a natural next step, rather than a terrifying leap. They were translators between the world as it is and the world as it could be. And this skill, the ability to translate vision into something the crowd can follow, is arguably rarer and harder than raw intelligence itself. Most brilliant people do not have it. More importantly, most brilliant people do not want to develop it, because it requires a kind of self-erasure that feels like betrayal. You have to simplify things you know are not simple. You have to appear certain about things you know are uncertain. You have to perform a confidence and clarity that your inner life does not actually feel. For people who value truth deeply, this is a nearly impossible ask, and so they do not do it. and so they do not lead. By now, a picture is becoming clear. There are essentially two kinds of people in the world of power. The first kind are the performers. They understand audiences. They know how to read a room, feel what a crowd needs, and give it to them. They are excellent at managing appearances. They create emotional connection effortlessly. They project confidence so convincingly it becomes almost indistinguishable from actual competence. They rise fast. They go far. They collect titles, followers, influence. And often, not always, but often, they are not the ones with the deepest understanding of the problems they are being trusted to solve. The second kind are the architects. They understand systems. They see underneath surfaces. They can trace causes forward into consequences. They know things others do not know, and see connections others miss entirely. But they are often terrible performers. They overcomplicate things. They hedge when the crowd wants certainty. They say it depends when the crowd wants absolutely. They cannot pretend that difficult things are easy, and so they stay behind the scenes. Or they step away from the competition entirely, or they try to lead and get replaced by someone smoother. Aristotle understood both types deeply. He did not say one was bad and the other was good. He said society needs both. But society will always elevate the performer over the architect, because the performer serves the immediate emotional needs of the crowd better. The architect may build a better future, but if the crowd cannot emotionally follow the architect there, the future never arrives. And so the performer leads, and the architect either learns to perform or learns to be invisible. Here's where things get truly interesting, and a little unsettling. Aristotle noticed something in Athens that has only become more true in the 2,400 years since he wrote it down. The visible leader is often not the real source of power. The person at the front, the one whose name everyone knows, whose face is everywhere, who gives the speeches and shakes the hands, is very often just a symbol. A figure designed to absorb the attention, trust, and frustration of the public, while the actual decisions get made somewhere else. In Athens, Aristotle watched wealthy patrons, established families, and powerful institutions shape the choices of the men officially in charge. The elected leaders had real constraints. They operated within a web of pressures and interests that ordinary citizens could not easily see. Does that sound familiar? Today, behind every elected leader, there are donors who need their interests protected, advisors who shape what information the leader even sees, institutions with their own momentum and agendas, industry groups that have spent decades building quiet influence. The face in front of the camera is making real decisions, but within a space that was largely defined by others. And this creates a strange and uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the person who seems unqualified, shallow, out of their depth, is in that position precisely because they are easy to manage. A deeply intelligent, independently thinking leader asks hard questions, pushes back on advice, builds their own analysis, becomes hard to predict and hard to control. A less capable leader is more dependent, more trusting of the advisors around them, more likely to follow the path already laid out, rather than forge their own. From the perspective of the people who hold real structural power, the donors, the board members, the institutional stakeholders, a manageable leader is often more valuable than an exceptional one. This does not mean every mediocre leader is a puppet. Life is always more complicated than that. But it does mean the incentives shaping who gets elevated sometimes actively work against putting independent thinkers at the top. The visible stage is real, but the backstage is where much of the writing happens. So why does this pattern repeat, generation after generation, civilization after civilization? Why does every era look back at the one before and say, those leaders were so inadequate, while simultaneously choosing new ones who fit the exact same profile? Aristotle's answer is one of the most honest things ever written about human nature. Because societies do not actually want to break the cycle. Not really. Not at the level of daily emotional life, where real choices get made. Intellectually, yes. People say they want better leaders. They say they want competence, vision, integrity, genuine expertise. They mean it when they say it. But when the moment comes, when they are standing in the voting booth, sitting in a board meeting, choosing who to listen to in a group, a different set of instincts takes over. The instinct that says, choose the familiar. Choose the safe. Choose the one who reflects you back to yourself. This is not stupidity. It is evolution. For most of human history, your survival depended on your tribe. Being accepted meant safety. Being cast out meant death. Your brain developed powerful mechanisms for detecting who belonged and who was dangerous, and for fiercely preferring the former. When a leader steps forward who speaks differently, thinks differently, looks at problems in ways that make the familiar feel uncertain, those ancient threat detection systems quietly activate. This one might destabilize things. I cannot predict what they will do. They do not seem like one of us. And the vote goes elsewhere. To someone warmer, more familiar, more reflective of what the crowd already believes. This happens across income levels, education levels, political beliefs and cultures. It is not a failure of any particular group of people. It is a feature of human psychology that cuts across all of them. And because these instincts never change, the cycle never fully breaks. Some generations produce leaders of genuine quality. Some moments in history see vision and capability rise together in one person. But these are exceptions. They happen despite the system's natural tendencies, not because of them. The default setting of human society is to produce leaders who fit the moment's emotional needs, not the moment's actual requirements. None of this comes without a price. When societies consistently choose comfort over capability, stability over vision, performance over substance, the cost accumulates quietly, invisibly, until it suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. Companies that always promote the likable manager over the insightful engineer stop innovating. They become experts at managing the present, while completely failing to prepare for the future. And then one day, a competitor who made different choices disrupts them, and they cannot understand why. Countries that consistently elect leaders who say what people want to hear, rather than what they need to hear, stop making the hard decisions. Long-term problems don't get addressed. The future gets borrowed against in exchange for comfort today. And then one day, the bill arrives. Cultures that reward entertainment over truth, confidence over accuracy, loudness over depth, produce people who are less and less equipped to navigate reality clearly. People begin to optimize for feeling good about their beliefs, rather than for having accurate ones. Aristotle saw this pattern too. He called it the natural decay of political systems. Every form of government, he argued, carries within it the seeds of its own degeneration. Democracy can decay into what he called demagoguery, rule by those who have mastered the art of telling crowds exactly what they want to hear. Not because any individual chose this consciously, but because the accumulated weight of thousands of individual choices, each one reaching for comfort over challenge, gradually tilts the whole system in that direction. The idiot in power is not a random accident. They are a natural product of that accumulated tilt. And the most sobering part of Aristotle's thinking is this. The crowd that produced the idiot in power usually cannot see the connection. They feel like victims of the leader's failures, while being the very source of the conditions that made that leader possible. So where does this leave us? If the system is built this way, if human psychology bends toward this, if the cycle is this deeply embedded, what is the point of understanding it? Aristotle did not believe that understanding a pattern meant accepting it without question. He believed understanding was the only real starting point for change. And while large systems are slow to shift, individuals can do something very specific with this knowledge. The first thing is to stop being surprised by mediocre leadership, not in a cynical, exhausted way, in a calm, clear-eyed way. When you understand why this keeps happening, you stop wasting energy on outrage every time the cycle repeats. You can see it for what it is, a predictable outcome of a predictable system. And that clarity is actually freeing. The second thing is to recalibrate where you look for real thinking. The most genuinely capable people rarely end up on the public stage, which means the most valuable ideas are almost never coming from the most visible voices. They are coming from the researchers, the builders, the quiet thinkers focused entirely on the work itself. Learning to find those voices and prioritize them over the ones who are simply performing the best is one of the most important habits you can build. The third thing is to develop the translator skill yourself. If you think deeply, see clearly, and have genuine insight. The question is not whether to abandon that depth. The question is whether you can learn to make your depth accessible to others without distorting what is true. That ability to simplify without lying, to make the unfamiliar feel approachable, to translate vision into something people can actually follow, that is the rarest leadership skill that exists. And the fourth thing, perhaps the most important of all, make your own choices with your eyes open. Every time you choose who to listen to, who to follow, who to trust, who to vote for, you are either feeding the cycle or gently resisting it. You can notice the moment when your brain reaches for the comfortable, familiar choice and pause long enough to ask yourself whether you are choosing based on what feels safe or based on what is actually true. You will not always choose the harder option. No one does. But doing it more often, in the moments that actually matter, is how individuals and slowly, collectively, societies grow beyond the patterns they were born into. Aristotle watched democracy take its first steps 2,400 years ago and saw something that most people living through it could not see. He saw that the system did not produce the best leaders. It produced the most compatible ones. The ones the crowd could follow without feeling threatened. The ones who kept the rhythm going, even if they couldn't make the music better. He was not entirely cynical about this. He understood that stability has real value, that a society which holds together and keeps functioning, even under mediocre leadership, is better than one that collapses while chasing perfection. But he also understood the cost, and he knew that the only people capable of breaking the cycle, even partially, even temporarily, were those who could see it clearly enough to stop being controlled by it. The idiot in power is not your enemy. They are a mirror. They show you what the system was built to produce. The question is not how to get rid of the mirror. The question is what you choose to do, now that you can see what is looking back at you. Think about that. And if this helped you see something you couldn't quite name before, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because that is how ideas that actually matter travel, not through algorithms, but through people who decide something is worth passing on.